mute your microphones for now. Then you can unmute if you will want to ask any questions. So yes, as I said, we'll start in approximately 3 minutes because we still have a lot of people joining.
Hi, sorry, Martin. When are we supposed to share our presentation now or
Muted myself. You can share it now, and I'll start with a short introduction in a second, and then we can move on with your keynote. All right, I think we can start now. You can share your presentation in the meantime during my introduction. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome you to the next Polish Asian Gathering, yet another one held online, in this third wave of COVID-19 and with yet another lockdown coming. I am very happy that so many of you decided to spend this evening here with us together. In fact, this time it is convenient that we are online because both of our speakers, as I believe, are in Krakow, and we are hosting this meeting from Warsaw. So at least the distance is shorter while we are online. This event is organized by the University of Warsaw, as I said, as a part of the Bridge to Asia project founded by the National Agency for Academic Exchange. Polish Asian Gatherings is a series of meetings of representatives of academia, business, and governmental institutions. The meetings are designed to foster knowledge about Asia, build a network of experts who deal with Asian affairs on a daily basis, as well as encourage the transfer of knowledge from academia to business and business to academia. The meeting will consist of two parts. First, a keynote speech by Zuzanna Kopania and Igor Szpotakowski. Then we are going to move on to the open discussion between the keynote speakers and all the participants. During the second part, we encourage you to use your cameras and microphones, but of course you can also use the chat feature and type in your questions and remarks. I will read them out loud. We hope that we can have some fruitful discussions here on Zoom, just like we did when we were meeting in person at the University of Warsaw last year. And now I'd like to shortly introduce our today's keynote speakers, Zuzanna Kopania and Igor Szpotakowski. So Zuzanna is a Jagiellonian University in Krakow graduate. She has also been studying law in the UK. She is a chairwoman of the Asian State Law Student Scientific Society and former chairwoman of the Far Eastern Student Society of Jagiellonian University. and she's a co-author of one monograph about Chinese law and editor of another. Her research interests include IT law and online dispute resolutions, Chinese legal history and legal culture, along with the position of women in Chinese society and law. And our second speaker tonight is Mr. Igor Spotakowski, who is the head of research department in Chinese Law Association and principal investigator in a 4-year research project of services contracts in private law of the PRC, codification in the area of decodification, founded by the Polish Ministry of Science and Higher Education in a Diamond Grant program. He is a co-author of 2 monographs about Chinese law and editor of 2 others. Igor is also a fellow of the Ryoichi Sasakawa Young Leaders Fellowship Fund. And we are honored that you have accepted our invitation tonight, and we can host you here this afternoon, actually. And Igor and Zuzanna Skino's speech will concern their current book and the book that they have just published on researching the Chinese law. So, Zuzanna, Igor, the floor is yours. And yeah, I think we'll be able to see your keynote now, yeah.
Oh, hi. Well, thank you very much. And thank you so much for the invitation. The floor is ours. Can you see the presentation? Yeah, okay. So let's go ahead. Let's start.
So hello from my side as well. And today we will speak about the do's and don'ts of researching China's legal system and its laws, talking about some research tips, some ideas, and what should all of you have bear in mind while researching, while reading about Chinese law, and what ideas we have present in our book as well, and we sum up some of them which are in our view the most relevant. So let's start from the short introduction, because all we know that China and Chinese law grow more and more importantly every day from a global perspective, not only national but national as well. So for Poland, so for every almost state in the world, China has some significance and relation with China as well, as not only in political reason, but also for business, commercial activities, and also for academics. So legal system and its laws are also important. And what is here really important, the uniqueness of China and its legal system, because it is different from many others which we used to think about the legal system as a scope of it, the framework. And China is unique in many ways, which we will discuss later, some of them. And all of us should have a good understanding of how Chinese law works, and also how to get the reliable knowledge about it, and how to properly analyze and research materials about it. And we are glad and really happy about it that many universities in Europe and many institutes, like, of course, we are here in Warsaw at the Polish Research Center of Law and Economy of China. And there are many other in Europe which developed in recent years, like in Durham University, like Finnish China Law Center, China Law Center of Erasmus School of Law in Netherlands, and there are schools of Chinese law around Poland and many in other countries, Chinese law program or with some elements of it. So conducting research on Chinese law is more and more popular, and but we need a few things. First, we need research materials, so sources of law, secondary, primary, and others. And many books are expensive. There's not a lot of them. And now we will show some points why this should be easier to you all, because the question is how to conduct effective Chinese legal research. And you should bear in mind a few really important things, like, first of all, you must be aware of legal culture and legal history, as well as main sources of the People's Republic of China laws, because this is really important before the start, and sometimes even basic proficiency in Mandarin Chinese and Chinese legal language will be helpful to even understand some journal papers in English, because language is really important. And we can go to the next slides.
I switched. Can you see that? Okay.
Okay, thank you. So first point about first tip, which you will also find in our book more broadly explained. It's that the first is that don't start your research with primary resources, as many of us will think at the beginning that, well, there's some regulation in China, I should check on it. And first of all, many of you will like to try primary sources, so statutes, legal acts enacted by National People's Congress, the Parliament of China, but it is tricky way, especially if you want to start your research on Chinese law or specific subjects, areas of law, because of some problems with this. So unreliable translation or even no available translation of many of them. Some of them are out of date, and not many still, quite a few researchers, lawyers got so high proficiency in Chinese legal language to do a whole research about only in Mandarin without some secondary help of English language or other European languages. And here, even if you know Mandarin perfectly, there is another problem: ambiguity and vagueness of laws and legal regulations in China, especially in matters of private law. Many of legal definitions, many terms are very similar to what we have even in Poland, but the understanding, the concept, and the place which that term or that provision is in a whole legal framework of People's Republic of China legal system could be slightly or even enormously different than our European, Polish legal understanding. This is also the point about interpretation and understanding. Even if we start with the really recent act of legal statutes of China, they usually come with meaningful legal explanation of it, and it's really important to also read some of it, because there's law in books and law in action, and it could differentiate a lot. But now Zuzanna will tell you more about where you should start. I told you where you should not, and now we'll have a change. The floor is yours.
I'd love to, but the slides are not. Oh, okay. Can you see the new slide? Okay, sorry. I started clicking a moment ago and it didn't work. So, according to Xiaomeng Zhang, when it comes to Chinese law, a complete legal research requires starting with secondary sources, and then later they should be combined with primary sources. And then you should, well, as Igor mentioned, you should check whether they are still valid and whether or not they are translated properly and all of that. But secondary sources, such as research guides, such as monographs and journal articles, help one get the basics of Chinese legal systems, and they also help identify most of the relevant primary sources. So some academic journals that you should take a look at when you start your journey with Chinese law should take a look at Frontiers of Law in China, Peking University Journal of Legal Studies, Tsinghua China Law Review, China Legal Science, Peking University Law Review, the Chinese Journal of Comparative Law, and China EU Law Journal, and Gdańsk Journal of East Asian Studies. And in our book, you'll also find a couple for German, a couple of journals for German speakers, and strictly Polish speakers. Okay.
Well, the next point, don't start with finding the patterns, in Chinese legal systems, and don't be Eurocentric, because Western bias is really important. There's a lot of research about it. There's a great book of Timur Skola, Legal Orientalism, which explain a lot about different point of view, and sometimes it's a false friend that I will show on the next slides, some picture with a map, which is really interesting about what I will say now, that Western bias, we think about Chinese law from a perspective that there are codes, there are constitution, there are, of course, some roots in modern age, so after the fall of the Qing dynasty, that throw China to more German-like, Swiss legal system-like, a little bit Soviet, a little bit French legal system. All of them made some points and have some impact and influence for modern Chinese legal systems, but we should always remember about a really long Chinese history, also about Chinese legal history, because even now, even in 21st century, there are many interesting examples when old philosophical ways, different customary traditions, customs are still significant for modern Chinese private law, especially civil law, and even in the new codification, in the new civil codes from 2020, which came into force on 1st of January 2021, there are still some significant aspects of Chinese legal tradition, much older and much more diverse and broad than many of modern or many of European one. So we cannot think about Chinese law as like, oh, there's German-like only because first of all, example is a good faith, because from the maybe linguistic point of view, from the point of view of just looking to the civil code, it's good. There could be an assumption that it looks really similar to the German way of thinking or Polish about what the good faith principle is in a civil code, in a civil law system. And in fact, good faith in a Chinese way of thinking, maybe it looks similar, but in case of interpretation in courts and by parties of a contracts and legal relations, it is more similar to English law, to the common law perspective on good faith, which created in especially England and Wales jurisdiction, so the oldest one about it. So, and there are different things that are in China. So it's like hybrid. It's not civil law jurisdiction. It's not common law jurisdiction. It's a hybrid. Of course, the significant part of the structures of the legal framework of China is from civil law jurisdictions. So there are codes, there's constitutions, there are no precedents, but there are guiding cases, judicial interpretation. Of course, there are, for example, trusts, which are not, for example, in Poland, there's no option to create a trust in a English way of thinking about it. There are other different interpretations, and there are many moral values in Chinese private law and in other areas of law which are significant, and our Western bias, which will create really wrong assumption about how it looks like. And it's not only the first step assumption. Many people, even significant scholars, live whole their life thinking about China and Chinese law from the perspective of legal Orientalism with their Western bias. And can I have the next slide to show a chart? If you can see, it's a map with legal systems and roots of legal origins in a world. And as you see, it's really Western bias, because there are only legal origins is English, French, German, Scandinavian, and socialist. And in that case, China will be German, which is not accurate, not only from the historical point of view, but also from a Chinese legal culture point of view. So because China have influence and impact from different jurisdictions and legal families in the world. So that's like, of course, German, but there's as well from some of them is English, some of them is French, Swiss, and Russian, Soviet-like, and some of them from Japan, and many is really Chinese-like. So because they are transparent from the Chinese long history in different times, in different occasions, and they're really here. So always bear in mind that there are some research and researchers with that bias, and it's worth to double check, even triple sometimes, because the truth, or maybe some of their interpretation of it, are much deeper. And like here, it's a peer-reviewed, really interesting monograph, but with bias and inaccurate. So bear in mind about it, and don't be Eurocentric. Next slide.
Good tip. I'll try not to be Eurocentric. It's also hard to not be Eurocentric in Europe, but yeah, we'll definitely try. Thank you, guys. Well, so you know how regulations in Poland regarding COVID and what you can or cannot do changed so fast. Well, it's a little bit similar when it comes to Chinese law and its legal system. It's really dynamic, and sometimes it is difficult to stay up to date with all current developments concerning the Chinese law and its legal system. And to develop sufficient awareness about China and its law, it is highly recommended that researchers dealing with China should consider periodically visiting websites and blogs dedicated to monitoring changes. Oh, sorry, I didn't switch okay, so this is my slide, sorry. Dedicated to monitoring changes in Chinese law. Blogs and websites about Chinese law should be considered as a tertiary source, and all information posted on this website should be verified by each researcher like 5 times before using them for academic purposes. But yeah, definitely use them as your guide. Check them as often as you can, because it changes so fast. I don't know what's faster, our legal changes when it comes to COVID and whether or not you can go to restaurants, or Chinese law, but especially since 2020 and the new civil code, it's really dynamic. So you can check out NPC Observer. which covers the National People's Congress and its standing committee legislation. And the mission of this blog is to provide information on the two bodies' legislative activities, which are mostly the events happening before, during, and immediately after their sessions. China Law blog. Well, this blog is about the practical aspects of Chinese law and legal system, including how law impacts business in China and internationally. Well, and the China Law Translate is also a very helpful resource. It's this crowdsourced, crowd-funded translation project, which includes English-Chinese translation for legal acts and news. Then we have Finnish China Law Center blog, which is promoting new research on Chinese law and legal culture, organizing academic and networking events, and publishing interesting posts on recent developments and research about the Chinese legal system. China Law Insights covers topics like Chinese company law, finance law, IP law, dispute resolution, and international trade law. And then we have the Chinese Law Discussion Group and its website. It has been co-founded by Dr. Minnie Zhou, who wrote a foreword to our book. And it is a discussion forum established at the University of Oxford for exploring a full range of issues with respect for the intersection and comparison of Chinese civil and common law and legal traditions of Chinese civil and common law and legal traditions, as well as international law issues regarding China and related to Chinese. The group organizes and co-hosts interesting events and publishes articles about China on their website. And then we have China Justice Observer. There's just an insightful source of knowledge about the Chinese judicial system in practice. And then we obviously have the website of the Polish Research Center for Law and Economy of China. I don't think that this website needs any further introduction, but definitely check it out. It has great resources that are definitely up to date. We use it periodically, as I mentioned. And then we have the Supreme People's Court Monitor, and where you can find posts and text on specific aspects of what the Supreme People's Court is up to. That's basically about it. And what is super important is that you cannot trust the first resource you find. Each province is so different. You may think about China as one country, but in fact, it's like a whole continent. And Igor will say a little bit more about the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Zuzana. So first of all, it is really important to always try to critically evaluate and compare different sources, as I said before, and because the first thing you'll find is not always the best. And you always need to try to go deeper and sometimes really, really deep to find something which is relevant and really good about the quality of that research. It's, of course, at the beginning really hard to, difficult to think about what is important, but the comparison and trying to compare different will help you to evaluate all of that skills, because of course it's no worries about it. So yeah, for example, we think about China as a one country, but many rules are in fact local rules, binding only one province or even a city. And for example, in regarding to social credit systems, there were different regulations which were tested in different cities, and each of them were totally different in many aspects. And so if you read only one of them, you will have some assumption of China, but well, the regulations in Beijing were different than in Hangzhou about, for example, some data protection and other issues of processing. And it's really important to, first of all, as I said, to know about what are the sources of law, and where you should take a look to find more information about them, which of them, or which of that information are important, and of course keep in mind that it could be different. It's of course there are the rules which are enacted by the National People Congress are usually binding around all the country, so it's on China, but sometimes there are many other regulations which are really, really important in Chinese legal systems, especially about administrative law and public law. And it's really important as well to think about what sources do you need to use, and you'll find many interesting websites and government websites and database which are quite new, because it's some of them come at the beginning of this year, about Chinese law and Chinese legal acts, sentencing, even online online court, online yeah, so judicial process in courts as well. And all it is in our book. And please, Zuzana, talk about the next slide.
Okay, so bear with me. Those questions might seem too basic, but I'll tell you why we're giving you those questions. So you should ask yourself those 5 questions when you start your research. Well, what information is relevant for the research? Obviously, you should be able to answer the question, what is the purpose of your research and what is your focus? Then who is providing the data and how credible is the resource? That's a very relevant question when it comes to Chinese law and how dynamic it is, as I mentioned. Okay, I'll admit them to someone. And academic books and journal articles that are peer-reviewed and published by recognized publishers are usually credible resources. But you should be more careful regarding news and posts on blogs and websites. And even when it's a book or a journal article, even if it was published last year, don't take it for granted. Check twice, check as many times as you have the time for, because always, it can vary from different provinces and it could have changed. And how accurate is the information? So even when you figure out, okay, this source is credible, this is good, this is valid, you just always cross-check with different sources. And what about objectivity? When it comes to China and our Eurocentrism, that we just are Eurocentric, and it's normal and standard for European scholars. It is much better if you are able to confirm the information given several sources, especially when it comes to specific dates related to Chinese history. And well, just as Igor mentioned before, it's just even if the book is very good and the author is well respected, sometimes when it comes to China, you have to just ask yourself, where is this author from? Is he biased? And if so, does he apply his Western-like patterns? You know, those are just good questions to have in the back of your mind. And are the data I have gathered up to date? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, all over again. Just always check. And if you find some translations of the legal documents, also, like, you might think, okay, I already know this fact from this article. Just check, just check out all the government websites that are translated and all the sources that you can get. I think that's okay. So I'm trying to change. Okay, sorry, give me a second. The presentation is not cooperating with me. Okay. Okay, so obviously the 6 what to do and not to do. Well, do read our book first, our research guide, that is recommended by well-respected Polish research centers in Polish in Poland. I wanted to say, am I saying it correctly? Yeah. Okay, and this is how it looks like. You will all not only you could already download it from the event, and it was posted on the event. I saw that Olga and Martin posted it, but you can find it on Google Books and our ResearchGate profile. And well, it's just our passion project. So we hope that you will love it as much as we love writing it. And we hope it will help you just take your first step in your journey in Chinese law. Thank you very much. Oh, and the next slide. Can we still use the last slide, Martin, or do we not have time anymore?
I think we absolutely have time. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Igor, go ahead.
So yeah, I thought about, first of all, when we thought how to write the research guide, we think about some major points that it should be up to date, because we found some quite old. So, and it's one of the first in Europe, even research guide about Chinese law in one book. And in this time it's with open access, and we try to make it as most, not only from academic way helpful, but also for commercial, to build some commercial awareness as well, because road through Chinese legal history to online dispute resolution, it's possible, because everything could be relevant when we talk about Chinese legal system and cooperating with China, because even some points of Chinese legal history could be really relevant to understand legal terms, really helpful to understand some provisions even. But China is also a place where many new technologies are being tried. Every day there are like online dispute resolutions, like blockchain evidence and smart contracts. There are many provisions which there's interesting now legal dispute about facial recognition in China, and in different cities there are different outcomes about it, and all of it is connected with Chinese culture, Chinese history. So this is a whole package. But if you start gathering knowledge about it, it's really, really interesting. And sometimes, of course, it's never-ending story, but I think it's a good, really good thing about it. In our book, we put also a chapter about how to read Chinese contracts. Maybe it was quite strange from the academic point of view, but of course, there are a lot of different ways to research Chinese law, not only from the academic perspective to write books or articles or reviews or just to compare some legal acts, but also to understand how it could be relevant into practice. And from my legal experience in many different companies in Poland and the UK, I assume that contract law is really important, and sometimes, because of course usually it is bilingual, so it's one is, for example, in English and in Chinese, but sometimes both versions are different in some really important provisions about the jurisdiction or language in which the contract could be binding. Of course, in China, the most important, if you want to have your contract recognized by Chinese court or arbitrary some commissions, so it's important to have it also in Chinese. And here in our book there is an agency contract, which is really interesting, I think, because it's a little bit different. But I think what is really important, and from the research and academic point of view, we don't have a lot of opportunities to look more and to have a gaze on some legal document in practice, like judgments, like especially contracts. So it's also important, and I think it's really important in future to have more about it. But thankfully, Chinese legal system also developing about it, and there are more and more websites which provide guiding case, some sentencing, even you can watch all trials online in live broadcasting from a courts around the China. So it's, well, internet and COVID pandemic really helps to Chinese system growth and make it more modern, even more modern than some of our European ones. So it's really interesting. And thank you very much. And I think we are open for questions. Thank you.
As soon as I figure out how do I close my presentation, I will definitely be open to answer questions. Sorry, give me a second. Do I stop share? I think. Oh,
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you
very much
for
thank you for your patience with my slides and figuring it out.
And I must say, I admire your research a lot. And I just had a short glimpse at your book, but I'm definitely going to read it as a whole. And I think this research you did, and the fact that you publish it online as an open access is very much respectable. And it's going to be very helpful for the future generations, as I'd say. Even though we're still young researchers, it's very useful for everyone. And we have 2 questions already on the chat. Everyone else is welcome to submit your questions, or you can either use your microphone or use the chat. And firstly, I'd like to ask you maybe a startup question, a follow-up. You mentioned, well, you didn't really mention the commercial databases on the Chinese law. Did you have any? Do you have any experience in using those commercial databases? Like in Poland, we have Legalis and Lex. In China, I believe there is also similar database organized by Wolters Kluwer, if I'm correct. Yeah. Could you tell us what's your opinion on those, and are those worth trying, or did you have any chance to get a better look at them?
Oh yeah, thank you for question. So yeah, there are quite of them. So first of all, we have, of course, in Poland, Lex and Legalis, and in Western world there is usually Westlaw and LexisNexis or Lexis, and both of them have their Chinese version. So it's Westlaw China and LexisNexis China. I've tried to use Westlaw China, and it's really interesting. Helpful, of course, because many of the acts are translated, and there are some different drafts of contracts or arbitration awards already made, and in their opinion, in compliance with, of course, Chinese law. So there are of them, but usually students don't have access to them, and of course, practitioners could have, especially in large law firms. And there are helpful. The most popular, I think, at this moment is still Peking University Law Database, which is the most up-to-date. And to be honest, for a really long time, it has, of course, it's in Chinese, but it has a lot of the documents, and of course, legal acts, and some of them on the lower levels, so usually inaccessible through the internet, for the simply research via Google or Baidu. But here there are, and it is useful, but there will be soon probably a free database, because there's a new database created in the February by the National People's Congress of China. Of course, it's in Chinese at this moment, but probably in future there will be more translations, and there is a lot of documents on different levels, but it's still developing. So at this moment there are some flaws, there are some not up-to-date documents, because it's not a commercial database. So usually it is slower about updates, but it's interesting source, and thankfully it is in our research guide, the link to it.
Does it also have court rulings, or is it just legal acts?
Just legal acts, because there are 3 different websites, one for court decisions and another for judgments, and the third one, as I said, with the online trials, recorded, pre-recorded, and live broadcasting. Live broadcasting are especially criminal law, because and it's really popular because you can watch a statistics there, and so people probably in their lunchtime are watching trials in China. Yeah, there's really interesting, because I read a few months ago a report about it, in different times, about the statistics, how many entries, how many people are watching in China, and
perfect thing to do in your free time. I mean, that's what I love to do when I eat my sandwiches. Yeah, during lunchtime.
Well, if you can't watch Netflix in China, at least you're able to watch some true legal drama happening live. Someone's real lives being decided. That's very interesting. Let's go to the questions on the chat. So Krzysztof Szura asked, did you have occasion to analyze general rules of the civil law of the People's Republic of China?
Yes, quite a lot, because the first book, and it's in Polish, so in Polish it's Zarys chińskiego prawa cywilnego w dobie kodyfikacji, Toruń 2019. So it's an outline of Chinese civil law in an age of codification. And my chapter especially is about a general part of the Chinese civil code, but there are many other chapters or articles which are on my ResearchGate account, which are about this issue. So yeah, because for some background, the first step of the codification of civil law in China was enactment in 2017, a general part of it, which in 2020 made the first part of a code, but through from the time from 2017 to 2021, it was just a legal statute with general principles, and so it's on my ResearchGate, and in the book about zarys chińskiego prawa cywilnego is unfortunately not yet in open access, so it's in Adam Marszałek publisher website. But there are many other open access which are also about it that I wrote, and there are also, and of course there's a book with Susanna, which there's China and the Chinese. There's a chapter about it as well, and from the different authors, especially Mimi Zhou, wrote two books about the first about introduction to Chinese contract law. There's a part of general part of Chinese civil code as well, but it is quite unavailable, and we need to go to Oxford to a research day to read them. But soon they will be probably in Jagiellonian University for my grant. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a really fun part of writing this book. We went to the University of Oxford, and just those libraries are amazing. Too bad the UK is in lockdown now, so we'd love to go back.
So you managed to visit before the lockdown? Lucky then.
Yes, in December.
We were really lucky, yeah.
That's cool. We have another question of Paulina Kazanecka. Can you tell us which publicly accessible databases or judgments do you recommend? I think it's a matter covered in your book, but.
Yeah, sure. Just give me a second, and maybe I will put some.
You're muted.
We can hear you. We could hear you at least. You are
okay. Okay, so that's good. Good. So first of all, I recommend.
You're
yes.
muted. You're muted.
Okay. Sorry, I have some delay.
We hear you. Okay, just okay, properly.
Can you hear me? I have delay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Everything is all right.
Okay, so sorry about it. So first of all, there's China Judgments Online database, and I will try to put an link on the chat for it. Yeah, I hope it is. And yeah, if you know Chinese, it's really good, and there is a lot of judgments on it and other documents. And of course, it is problem that it is in Mandarin, but for example, about guiding cases, there is quite interesting project from Stanford University, guiding case system, and all of this, yes, it's a China guiding case project, and there's many of guiding cases published, and many of them are translated by professional researchers specializing in it. And there was open law database a few years ago, but it's not so good about the newest one. All of the links are in books, so you know, it's hard.
Go ahead and download it.
Yeah, so because and of course the China courts try online and there are broadcasting, but the one show I just posted should be sufficient. I think there's one more, but I need to find a link on it, and it's in book. So if I will not be so lucky at this moment in a few months, it is definitely there.
Thank you. Okay, so I think yet another question I missed before. I think it's a very general one, and it deserves a book by. What one piece of advice can you give to someone who is just entering a Chinese market? The Chinese market.
I'll take this one, if you don't mind either. Well, there are tons of tips and bits of advice that we could give. As you mentioned, it deserves, it's not even one, just multiple books about it. But the one thing, if I were to choose one thing, it would be get yourself accustomed and check out the customs, local customs, and check out, if you don't know yet, what is Mianzi and Guanxi, because those are really crucial in Chinese business ventures and just Chinese relationships, and may decide whether or not you get a contract or you even get a meeting or a second meeting with another business manager or even a CEO, whether or not you acted properly, whether or not you answered his act of kindness properly, whether or not you accepted his act of kindness. That's really, really important. Is there something, if you were to choose, one piece of advice, what would it be for someone entering Chinese market?
Well, do really good research on it first, especially in the field, in the area which you are looking to start your business in, because there is, first of all, a lot of different legal regulations and different local regulations about it. There you need to have, of course, great contacts, and they can take a lot of time, and there is a lot of different players around it. So be patient, because it's not easy. Many of even Polish companies tried, and because of the lack of patience, lack of understanding, lack of knowledge and research, failed. One of that interesting thing which came to my mind through my experience is that when I was in Beijing 2017, I just go to the shop and take a look on the milks, and the German milks were really high on the shelves, and Polish was on the bottom, yeah. But there are some Polish which were higher. Why? Because all of the branding was in German. So yeah, so if you understand your consumers, do good research, because sometimes it's all where you need to start, but it's quite complicated discussion for or another meeting.
Yeah, way too complex. And maybe an idea for our next book. We'll try. We'll check it out.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions on chat, but I think I've got another question. At the beginning of your presentation, when you were talking about orientalizing the law, you mentioned that there are some very specific Chinese constructs, Chinese institutions regarding the law. You discussed the principle of good faith, for example, that it looks like it's adapted from German law, but it's actually more of a common law principle. Could you perhaps tell us something more about the principles, or if there are any, that are that originate from China and from Chinese tradition in general. Not that are not adapted from anywhere in the world. So anything that is original and Chinese. If anything like this comes to your mind.
Sure. So from that point of view, very interesting is a general part of the Chinese Civil Code. First, about what I would like to say is Article 10, which restores custom as a source of Chinese civil law. And through that doors, we could say, it brings a lot of Chinese culture and some traditions into a modern Chinese legal system, which is quite interesting because, first of all, about a little bit of background. It's not the first time in Chinese history when that type of provision is in a Chinese Civil Code. In the whole history of China, Chinese Civil Code in 1930, in Republic of China, there were similar clauses, but after Second World War and creating a People's Republic of China, that civil codes were not binding anymore, and there was this discussion was slashed for many years, and now in 2017 it's come back once again. And it's really interesting because there are, of course, in Chinese legal civil, in the Chinese civil system, Chinese civil legal system, there are many other provisions which are connected with some philosophical background, with the morality and all principles. Of course, it's not said about first about that is for example, Confucian or any other of the Chinese philosophy tradition. Of course, it's a communist one and with Chinese specificity, but there are, if you know the Chinese history, some of them which are really interesting. So come back to the custom. There was really interesting disputes in the Republic of China about, for example, tombs, about selling flats where someone was killed and they're murdered, and there was no information about it to the buyer. Many others connected with, for example, Feng Shui, which were really important in, especially not in the big cities, but in the rural areas of China, traditions. And some of them could be used as a source of law, of course, to be recognized as some tradition as a custom. It's not an easy way because it must be long developed and never stopped. Really, it's not for example, whole country, but single counties inside China. Especially, for example, there is some really important mountain or something, and there were possibilities in the past in Republic of China to use that custom in many cases, many disputes, even in the Supreme Court. So there's interesting research. I've wrote an article about it, about the role of custom in the new Chinese Civil Code, because there were interesting materials and research papers in Chinese, unfortunately. So, and from the comparative way of thinking, comparative legal or thinking, it's really interesting how to use it. And well, still is a lot to say about it because there were not many really major cases about it, but definitely in the future the custom could, so the Chinese tradition could be really important regarding contracts, regarding some acts. Of course, the general clause, so general principle of law. So it's up to judges to decide about it. But you know, it could be risky. But on the other way, it's really Chinese style. So it's one of them. Another is an maybe obligation. It's a really strong word for parents to look after their children, and to children to look after their parents when they are old, which is also in general part of civil law, and it's connected with some Confucian principles. And of course, it is also in modern Chinese civil code. There are some influences, some impacts. There are also really new things which are not mentioned in Chinese past, but there are really strong inside the Chinese legal system, like green principle and so-called greening of Chinese civil law to make them more sustainable. And it's really interesting concept. And I think that it's developed because environmental law as an administrative law, as a public law, was really weak in China, and there was a lot of efforts to make China more less air pollution, more sustainable development, more care should be taken to protection of environment. And there are some interesting concepts in tort law, in contract law, which are connected with greening principle. So it makes interesting system of rules and principles in Chinese civil law, which, well, this is Chinese characteristic in this way as well, but a new one you created. Also about data protection and issues about the privacy. We still don't have a Personal Data Protection Act in China. I hope that it will come into force after this year National People's Congress session, but unfortunately it is still a draft. But maybe in future, for example, in next year, it could be enforced. And for now, many interesting principles about privacy and people's reputation are in civil code as well. So it's interesting because there are really there are some principles from the Chinese modern country, the communist one, which are all we have deep root in Chinese Confucian philosophy, and there are in Chinese civil code. And the Chinese civil code is called like an encyclopedia of social life. So there's an answer of almost every question in there according to the Chinese media. So it's a really interesting concept as well. So this is a broad topic, and it could be really long discussion about it, but it's definitely really interesting.
Maybe we should have another meeting to discuss it further. Thank you. If we have any more questions, we can ask them. If not, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Igor, for hosting this meeting. I think we learned a lot, and we are all just waiting to read your book, and then maybe we'll have more questions, more follow-up questions. And once again, thank you for presenting your keynote tonight, and for preparing this research guide. And thank you all to all participants for joining us today. We'll be hosting another Polish Asian Gathering next week, so stay tuned. And soon we also be the Polish Research Center is also organizing a conference on global education. So you are all invited to learn more at our social media and or on our website. I think it's been updated already about the conference. And so yeah, stay tuned, and see you on the next Polish Asian gathering next
I
week.
just wanted to add that
Yeah.
thanks very much for inviting us, and please don't hesitate to ask us any questions if you have them after reading our research guide. At the end of the research guide, you'll find QR codes to our ResearchGate account which you can use to just message us. And because we forgot to put our email addresses on our presentation, so yeah, go
So it's
ahead.
not a WeChat. So it's not a WeChat QR code this time.
Sorry.
So it's not a WeChat QR code, but
Yeah, not this time.
Yeah. We decided to now take some patterns, take some solutions, and use them in a Polish, but more of a Polish and European version. So our ResearchGate accounts you'll find after scanning them, and yeah, please don't hesitate to contact us.
thanks. Thank you once again, and have a good night.